Welcome to the Riveo Impact Lab, the podcast in which we explore what it means for small businesses to have real impact in an evolving world. On this podcast, we engage our curiosity around topics like sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and the ethical outcomes of our decisions, all from a small business perspective.
I'm Ellen, and this is my co-host, Emily.
This month, we've been thinking a lot about inclusion, especially in the LGBTQIA+ space. What does it mean to create an inclusive environment that's respectful of the dignity of all people in regards to something that is often a private topic, like gender and sexuality? How do we ensure that employees, clients, and other stakeholders feel welcomed and know that their personhood and perspectives are valued? We certainly don't have all the answers, but it is up to us to seek those answers out.
In this podcast, we're talking with best-selling author, speaker, and Emmy-nominated filmmaker Fiona Dawson. Fiona is the founder of Free Lion Productions and the author of 2 books, Are Bisexuals Just Greedy? And her new book, What Does the LGBTQIA Label Mean? Explaining the spectrum of gender and sexuality with humor and ease. Fiona is a DEI BA, or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Accessibility consultant with an expertise in LGBTQIA+ inclusion. She is also the director of the Emmy-nominated New York Times op-doc, Transgender, At War and in Love, and the award-winning feature documentary, Transmilitary. Fiona has been honored by President Obama as an LGBT Artist Champion of Change. Please enjoy our discussion with Fiona. Fiona, I'm so excited to have you here on the Riveo Impact Lab. Thanks for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Ellen.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying yes.
Yeah,
and
of course.
We've been wanting to talk to you for a while. You're a writer, a speaker, a filmmaker, and a consultant. One of the things that ties your work together is centering on inclusion, and particularly LGBTQIA. Or IA plus inclusion. So, before we get into all of the things I want to ask you about, let's start with your story and how you got into this area as an advocate.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I like to first start off by debunking my accent because I still sound very British, but I've actually lived and worked in the US for more than 24 years now. So I grew up in a very rural town with a severe lack of diversity, a small town called Boston that's in Lincolnshire, that's 100 miles north of London. And when I was a teenager, one night, my dad and I were watching television and he kind of blurted out with, I can understand men being gay and I can understand women being lesbians, but I think bisexuals are just greedy. And as a teenager who had only ever identified as straight, I really didn't think anything of it, but it was just such a memorable moment for me that then came into play later in my life. So I continued growing up in the UK. When I was 21, I went to go volunteer in Bangladesh. I taught English in Portugal. And then in the year 2000, I ended up in Houston, Texas, a city that I love. Back then, it was still hot and cheap, but I really enjoyed my time in Houston. And I started working in advocacy and HIV and AIDS. And in 2004, I came to understand myself as being gay. I'd previously been married to a man. That marriage had ended, and I had an extreme attraction to a woman and realized I was madly in love, and I was in a relationship with her for 2 years. So I came flying out the closet as a lesbian. The relationship ended 2 years later, carried on with my life. Career-wise, ended up working in corporate social responsibility and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as an out gay woman, had really started doing a lot of advocacy for LGBTQIA+ concerns. At that time, we were working on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, where lesbian, gay, and bi people were still banned from serving in the US military. We were also still working on marriage equality. So I would then go share my story about how, as an out gay woman, I had less rights and protections as an immigrant than I did as a straight identified person, and just that juxtaposition of it. So that's kind of like where I got my foundation, my experience, like building relationships within our community during that time. 2010 came around and I realized that my advocacy, my speaking engagements, and also I'd started dabbling in filmmaking, the passion for that overshone the passion for doing the corporate DI work. So I left my corporate job and I'm working for myself ever since for over 14 years now. Moved up to New York to develop my career as a filmmaker. And I don't want to say it's New York's fault, but I just happened to be there when I realized that the only reason I was turning down a date with a guy was because I'd labeled myself gay. But if I was really honest with myself, I was actually attracted to that man too. So I kind of like had this freak out moment thinking, oh my God, I don't want to be straight. I'm not straight. Like I'm very attracted to women. And then I was like, oh, there's a B in LGBT. And so then in 2012, go flying out the closet as a bisexual woman. And then I realized what my dad had said, a couple of decades prior was still true, in that there is such a stigma and a stereotype against the bi plus community, thinking that we're all just promiscuous and greedy. And some people might be promiscuous and greedy, but it's not limited to bisexual people. And there doesn't need to be any shame around that either. And so I would say, like, just to kind of land my answer to your question, my own self-discovery of my non-binary nature of my sexual orientation, and then my advocacy in that world, and then my friendships that I developed with trans people. And I realized that after Don't Ask, Don't Tell, trans people were still banned in the US military. And I felt very ashamed that we'd done all this work and I hadn't known that at the time. And I just felt like these were untold stories. And I had many friends who were trans in the military and started documenting their stories. So I'd say really my passion for this work and the way I've gotten into it has been both from a very personal perspective and lived experience, but then also building friendships and collaboration and really having a high level of empathy and drive to be able to advocate for the underserved and the marginalized. I realize as a queer woman, as a bisexual, pansexual woman, I still operate in this world with a lot of privilege because of, my white skin. People love my accent. I can get into spaces without being fearful, and not everyone can. And so I just have an innate drive to serve and protect and uplift and help all people in the world.
That's a great story. I love the story. Love the full circle back to your dad's premonition or whatever that was. And right now we're recording this shortly after the election. So I have to ask, so many of the programs and things that you've advocated for in the past are now in jeopardy, potentially. How are you feeling now? Like, what's the road forward at this point?
Yeah, they're potentially in jeopardy. I, from a personal experience, I was in shock for the first 24 hours. But the day after the election, I went to the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce luncheon. And it was a lunch that had, been scheduled, it was just happened to fall as the monthly lunch. And I knew I needed to be there regardless of which way the election went. And I think just throwing myself back into my community and my people really kind of helped bring me together and galvanize my call to action. And in fact, I made a new friend at that lunch, a woman who is a trans woman who is part of the chamber, and we hadn't gotten the chance to talk before. And I know about her. She's a co-founder of Austin Rise, which is a female soccer team in Austin. And we had been talking about the idea of doing a film and a documentary about how this soccer team came to be and the empowerment that women have from playing the game and that kind of stuff. And so I ended up giving her a car ride to go pick up her car. So we spent an hour together in a car journey, just sharing each other's stories. And I think it fueled me and healed me and helped me process the shock of people's decisions. The issues that I'm so concerned about, and the LGBTQIA2S plus advocacy I'm so concerned about, is extremely real to the people that are affected by it. But I think that there are obviously so many other issues and concerns that other people would prioritize over that. And I don't think it's because they hate trans people or that they, they want to marginalize us more. It's more about they want a quality of life that they're seeing on their social media feeds that seems completely inaccessible. And it's like, or not even on social media, like, people are working several jobs, like, they want to be able to provide their family. Like a lot of people want these basic needs met. And I think that the decision that people made on who they want to be president was probably made in the best interest of themselves. And these other issues and concerns are just not a major priority. So the way that I like to approach my work is I like to promote love. I think that the advocacy organizations out there have done a lot of great work, but I think our language should have changed by now. I mean, when I started this over 2 decades ago, people were saying fight hate. Well, clearly fighting hate is not getting us anywhere. I don't believe in fighting hate. I believe in promoting love and educating. And so the filmmaking that I want to do, the storytelling that I want to do is all about educating, entertaining, and inspiring. Let me and others help us educate people on the spectrum of gender and sexuality, help us decrease fear that people have about what it means to be trans or what it means to be LGBTQIA+. Like, let's get rid of the motivation and the drive to use people's identities as political bait. And then that way, maybe we can just remove that layer. I think there are many, many different social problems in the world. And I've chosen specifically to focus on this one because this is my expertise. This is what I'm called to do. I'm hoping that, and there are other people that are working on other layers. But if we can actually advance society's understanding of gender, biological sex, and sexual orientation being 3 distinct things that interlock and are all on a spectrum, then I feel like we might be able to get somewhere.
Might be able to get somewhere. And I love that you were telling the story about the car ride and talking about the possible, documentary about the softball team and our baseball team.
Soccer team.
Oh, soccer team. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sometimes
it's okay.
It's a little fuzzy.
It's okay. Yeah. The
it's
soccer
ball,
team.
It's a thing, I don't know. But I apologize.
You kick it.
Right. But the story element, stories are so powerful, and we talk about impact and advocacy and change when we're able to humanize these topics and tell stories. It's really a powerful thing. And so I'm hoping that this is a good segue into the history of your work with film. In 2015, you made an op-doc for the New York Times, the short film Transgender, At War and in Love, about trans airman Logan Ireland and his time in Afghanistan. And then in 2018, you co-directed the feature film Transmilitary, which expands on the ideas in that short film, and Logan also appears in that one. Can you talk about how you came across this story and what was the trajectory that led you to making these documentaries?
Yeah. Well, going back to the initial story I was sharing about my personal journey, if you imagine that I moved to New York and I had more culture shock moving from Houston to New York than I did from, the UK to Houston. And I realized, oh my gosh, what on earth have I done? I had built myself up in Houston and I had a great community of friends. And then, I moved to New York and I feel like a tiny amoeba on the sole of someone's dirty shoe, It's a tough place. Anyway, so again, we'd done all this work on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and all that time we had said LGBT people should be able to serve in the military. So of course the repeal happens, it goes into effect in 2011, and it's early 2012 that I realized that, trans people are still banned. It was a completely separate issue, which also kind of goes down to how we like to lump queer identities in one box, which is completely inaccurate because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was about sexual orientation. The ban against trans people was about gender identity and biological sex. And so Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a law that had to be repealed. Whereas once that law was gone, you still had DOD, Department of Defense, military policy in effect that banned trans people from serving. Ridiculous things that were outdated from medical policies going back to World War II. Even like what your genitals look like could disqualify you from service, which one is so ridiculous in so many ways. Your genitals don't help you do your job for the most part in the military. And also it kind of goes over the fact that 1 in 100 people are born intersex, meaning that they have any combination of male and female sex tissue, chromosomes and hormones. And so there has still been a lot of medical policies that ban intersex people from serving because they don't neatly fit into a binary bucket of what biology is expected, which is, humans have got it wrong in so many different ways. Anyway, so I just felt like we cannot carry on, and like the advocacy world had moved to marriage equality. I was like, how on earth could we have used all these LGBT stories for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and yet just overlooked the fact that trans people were not allowed to serve? And so by then, I already had many friends who were trans and in the military or veterans. So I already had a personal friendship and relationship with them. And so I just started filming and documenting their stories. And so there was a top secret conference in Houston in 2013, like January 2013. It was the first time that a group of trans service members had ever gotten together in person. Like you're talking about 30 trans people in one room, which it was huge because it was so hard for people to find each other. And so I was fortunate enough to be invited to that meeting, and that's where I got to meet several different active duty trans service members who were willing to go on camera and share their story. And that's where I met Logan. Layla I had met before. So Layla is now Logan's wife. They've been together over a decade. It might even be 12 years. I'm losing my math right now. But anyway, 12 years. Layla's story is so important as it ties into Logan's story too for Transgender at War and Love, because Logan was getting deployed to Afghanistan. All of his paperwork still said he had been assigned female at birth, but he was being treated as a guy. People were using male pronouns. He was given male uniform, and he was sleeping in male barracks, and he was like just doing his job as the man he knows himself to be and who is. And there was this very interesting situation where it's like, so what happens if people find out he's trans, like while he's serving in Afghanistan? And so Layla and Logan are having a long distance relationship. Layla is also, she's a trans woman in the US Army. And I think the juxtaposition between how a trans woman is treated versus how a trans man is treated, and a trans woman of color, which is who Layla is as well, like she faces much more severe discrimination, don't want to like spoiler for the movie, but like she's eventually discharged, like medically discharged, or accepts a discharge because she just can't tolerate with how she's being treated anymore. Whereas Logan, they do come to find out he's trans while he's in Afghanistan, and they support him and they do the right thing. They give an exception to policy. They realize that these policies are wrong. They need updating. You're a great airman. You're doing a great job. We're going to protect you and allow you to continue serving your country. And so I just feel like very passionate about military stories because, 78% of Americans think that being a military officer is a prestigious job. So if you have this bias against trans people and you don't know a trans person, but all you're seeing are these horrific, fearful, inaccurate videos on, various news media channels and social media, but you support the military and you give reverence to military service members, then maybe you're going to have a little bit more understanding of what it means to be trans. And so I just think like back then, you can still get fired for being trans, but you can give your life to your country. Trans people are twice as likely to serve in the military than cisgender or non-transgender service members. More than 15,500 service members are active duty and identify as transgender. More than 134,000 veterans are trans. And so I just feel like their stories can have significant impact and change, and the films did. Like the short film got Emmy nominated. We continued making the feature documentary, and the work has been recognized as by the White House Champion of Change Award, and is actually like helping end the ban on trans service members. And it's not just the storytelling, but when you combine storytelling with research, facts, figures and data and advocacy, you've got that perfect triad where you can make, societal change. So yeah, I think that kind of answered the question.
It's really fascinating. And it comes, this whole podcast is really about impact and making impact. And that's a great example about taking these stories, sharing them, kind of, I hate to say normalizing them, but I think in a way, like we are getting more used to seeing gay people in media, in stories. Thinking back to when I was growing up, certainly was a lot less common, if ever, that you would see gay characters in a show or movie. So, that's certainly changing. Have you seen, encouraging signs with how people in this community are portrayed in the media in recent years?
Yeah. So GLAAD, and it's GLAAD with two A's, GLAAD, GLAAD.org, is the leading media advocacy organization in the United States. And they do annual reports on where are we on TV, where are we on film, and looking at the number of representation of different characters. And so if you go to look at their reports, you can see that over time, there has been an increase in characters that identify as LGBTQIA2S+. And for the most part, the representation has increasingly become a bit more positive. But in the last couple of years, it started to go down again a little bit. The other thing as well is that you don't have enough like bisexual, pansexual representation in TV and film. So most of the time, like the bisexual character is where their bisexual identity is used as a plot twist. They're manipulative. They might be in relationship with somebody of a male gender, but then they'll use their bi plus identity to go have sex with a woman in order to achieve something or accomplish something. Oftentimes the bi plus character is killed off at the end. They're typically, mentally unstable. And so you've got a lot of negative representation that reinforces these stereotypes and tropes, which means that it's much harder to come out as bisexual than it is to come out as gay. And then also, of course, when you're transgender, most transgender people are also bisexual. In terms of their sexual orientation, trans people are like bi plus first and then straight before they identify as gay and lesbian. And so you've kind of got this weird web of vagueness, and there's not enough clarity on when you're talking about gender identity, when you're talking about biological sex, and when you're talking about sexual orientation. So I think while we have had advancements and more positive representation, there is still some very harmful stereotypes and tropes. And I'm not even going to call out some of the shows because I don't want to name them, but a couple are coming to mind. And there's one show where there was a line, talking about a cisgender man is dating a trans woman, and he is trying to decide what his sexual orientation is. And, he goes, bisexual, I guess. And she goes, how do you know you're bisexual? And his reply was, because I feel like I'm a fraud no matter who I sleep with. And it just stabbed me like a knife. And I can't deny if that's his lived experience and that's how he feels, then I'm not one to say that he shouldn't say that. But what really pained me in this TV series is that there was no resolution about that afterwards. There was no like explanation as to why you might feel like that. It was like that line was delivered as though, okay, yes, we all come to expect or accept that, you know, if you're bisexual, then, you know, you're a fraud or you're indecisive or like, you know, there's something negative about that experience. So while a lot of us who are bi plus do go through that negative feeling, like I think that film and TV has an opportunity to educate the audience to help us overcome that and get to a point where lines like that would never even be delivered. You know, the line, how do you know you're bisexual? Well, I know I'm bisexual because I have enough self-awareness to realize that my capacity for attraction to somebody else is not solely dependent upon their gender or their biological sex. Like, that might sound like a bit of a nerdy reply, but it's like, you know, I don't feel like a fraud. I feel like I've got a superpower, you know? So
the show that's coming to mind that I think did a good job is Schitt's Creek.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. And you know, I'm thinking about the scene where David's like, I like white and red and sometimes rosé.
Yes. Yeah. The wine or the label. Yeah. If anyone's watching this, like, please go to YouTube, Schitt's Creek, wine or the label, because that scene does great on trans inclusion and non-binary inclusion as well. You know, I forget exactly. It was something like, and I once tried, you know, a Chardonnay that's now a Pinot, you know, or something, you know, it was just, it demonstrated trans, non-binary, like I use that actually in my presentations as an example of like positive representation. Like, Schitt's Creek's done incredible, you know, and like going back, you know, 20 plus years, I think it's like 25, 30 years, like since, you know, when Ellen was on the front page of Time and like Ellen coming out, it was pivotal. And it was great, like back for that period of time when we were still talking about sexual orientation and gender in very binary terms. You know, when I came out as gay, I didn't really know anyone who was bisexual. I later came to know someone who was bi, and I know I had internalized biphobia against that person. I hardly knew a trans person. We had a lot of drag queens, and everyone was just gay or straight. You know, and that was, you know, in my lifetime. And now we're living in a world where close to 30% of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ+. Now, the future is very queer. Younger generations are refusing to stay in these binary buckets. And film and television and positive storytelling needs to represent that. One, so they can learn about themselves. And two, so that their family members can understand them as well. You know, I think that there are a lot of people who have children, grandchildren who are coming out and using words that they've got absolutely no idea what they mean. And I think that we need to do a better job and a more like a higher volume job. There needs to be more content about non-straight lives, because that is the direction I see the world going in, and we need to help people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's encouraging to see more representation in the media, and like you said, not all of it's positive, but it's hopefully going in that direction. What about your work with I'm going to say this wrong, DEIB? And then I feel like there's
it depends. It depends which way. Like I say DEIBA. Like my acronyms have got really long, but DEIBA is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility.
Accessibility. Thank you for that.
Yes,
that's one actually with our company. We're doing a ton of work with accessibility, educating ourselves, making sure our content is accessible, educating our clients. And yet I need to start including that when I say DEIBA. So thank you
You're welcome.
for that. It's ever evolving. We're always learning. But my question was, in your role in this world where you're helping organizations raise their awareness around inclusivity, what are some of the tactics that you use, or what's some of the strategy around creating a better environment for the LGBTQ these acronyms are going to kill me.
It's okay. If you want, I'll say like LGBTQIA 2S+, and if somebody wants to know what that means, it's in my book. But then once I say that once, you can say queer. Queer can be an umbrella term.
Community. Okay,
so in the conversation, like once you've said it, you say, okay, the queer. And this is another, sorry, I don't mean to go on a tangent. I'm going to get to your question, but I've also recently learned, and I'm trying to train myself to say, the queer population or the LGBTQIA 2S+ population. Now, no, there's nothing wrong with community. I'm not kicking out the word community. But I realize, like, I think it's not my idea. I read it off somewhere or someone. Forgive me, I can't remember who I need to quote for saying this. But when you talk about a population, you're talking about in more scientific terms of like these numbers are being counted. You know, a community involves so many different layers. Community can be a culture, you know, and I think community can be a pocket. A population is like, these are the freaking numbers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
No, I appreciate the information. But getting back to the question, you know, when you are working, so we talked about media and, you know, shows and movies and things like that. But when you're working with a company, say you get hired to come in and train them, what's your approach there?
Yeah. So specifically, there are a number of different services that myself and my team offer. Number one is like starting off with speaking engagements. I love giving a presentation with ERGs, and I think it's most effective when you actually collaborate across many different ERGs. So it's very easy for somebody in a company to think, oh, you know, Fiona's an out bisexual woman. She talks about LGBTQIA 2S+ inclusion. She should speak to the Pride group. Now, yeah, I'd love to speak to the Pride group, but I also want to speak to the families group. I want to speak to the women's group. I want to speak to the people living with disabilities. Like, all of those ERGs all have a gender identity, a biological sex, and a sexual orientation. And I think these concerns are much more intersectional than might first appear above the surface. BIPOC, people of color, are more likely to identify as queer than white people. Queer people are more likely to be living with a disability than non-queer people. So you have like, and then you've got families, of course, you know, who have got family members who are coming out. Veterans, like, you know, trans people are twice as likely to serve in the military than non-trans or cisgender people. And so I think that bringing all these ERGs together is a strategy that any company can do with or without me, but I think it just makes complete sense. And especially if you're going through a time when your budgets are becoming tighter, which I think is completely wrong. I think budgets should be increasing for the employee resource group, not decreasing. But being able to like pull your resources not only just makes financial sense, but it also has a greater impact on inclusion. You know, when people are working for a big company and they're volunteering for an ERG, they don't have the capacity to volunteer for all the ERGs where they might have an identity. And so I think like as much crossover that you can do as possible is great. And then it's the building empathy is what we focus on in our work. And that primarily comes from storytelling. And so one of the offerings that we give are doing short form storytelling content for companies to stream internally. They could use it externally if they want, but it's much more for an internal streaming in order to help people understand each other's identities. So for example, with my largest client, they're a global beverage firm. They have operations in 56 countries around the world. And we got to go to Zambia to make a short film about a day in the life of a woman that works in one of their beverage factories. But we do more than just a day in the life. Like we unfold into her personal story. And she shares how when she was 11, her dad died of cancer, but he was a mechanical engineer and he always inspired her to go into mechanical engineering. So just because you're a woman doesn't mean you can't do this. She is now working in this factory and doing what is seen as a man's job and is inspired by her dad. And so I think many people of any gender, of any age, of any ethnicity, race, cultural heritage, you can relate to an experience of a family relationship and or wanting to provide for yourself and your family and your career and that kind of stuff. And so I don't want want to or try to compete with internal production teams. We're not agency. We don't do commercial. We're kind of like independent, gritty filmmakers with a background in DEI and an expertise in LGBTQS or queer inclusion. And we have an ability to be able to provide a psychologically safe space for people to open up and share their stories without feeling, everybody, they feel vulnerable, but feel like they can be safe in being vulnerable and knowing that their story can have impact. And I think that is the offering that we at Freeline Productions can best serve and do, is work with people who are building the framework, work with the policymakers. We can work with all the other parts of the team, but what we excel at is uplifting that human spirit in video and storytelling.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And as you're talking, I do think that everybody has an innate desire to be heard and to tell their story, and just providing the vehicle to let that happen and share that with other people there's a kind of a human connectedness that we all crave on some level that you're providing, which I think is great. Are there any other metrics that companies can look to like know they're doing a good job here?
Yeah, I think that in terms of metrics, for too long, DEI has been focused on quotas, like, how many women do we have, how many people of color, BIPOC people, like how many with disabilities. And while I think counting people is important, especially when it comes to policy and like access to healthcare, like you have to be counted in order for people to realize that, hey, you're a concern. The focus really needs to be on human inclusion, for want of a better word, and productivity and employee satisfaction. And while I think, yes, doing an employee satisfaction survey can be helpful, it also has severe limitations because there's a lot of eye rolls about that. And I think that what you have to do is, while on the one hand, like, put in place solid policy and protections and access to needs in an equitable fashion in your workplace, but you've actually got to demonstrate with behavior and take action to know that you actually mean those policies for the greater good of the employees. And so I think finding as many different ways to engage no matter who, anyone's identity, is like one of the most critical things to do. Because when you create a culture where everybody can feel psychologically safe, they don't feel like they have to cover themselves at work, that the numbers will follow. And I kind of like want to reinforce this from a lens of like, anyone listening to the way I talk could easily come to the conclusion that I'm a super liberal and which way I voted and I hate all the others and I think they're stupid. And that is not the case. Like, when I say about inclusion, I mean inclusion for everybody, including the white, straight, cisgender man needs to be included in this work. This work is not white straight people or people that vote Republican versus everybody else. Like, and I think that is how people are seeing it. And that's why we have a problem. And we need to take politics completely out of all of this. This is not political. This is about everybody wanting to feel happy and safe and prosperous in their life. We have to change the way we do DEI work. And, we have to bring people together and find their common ground in all of their different stories, and take away all of these, trigger words and this woke language and all of that. Just like, get rid of all of that, burn it down, which is what is happening. Like, in some ways.
One way or another, yeah.
Exactly. Everything is getting burnt down right now, but everything is going to be okay. Like, I'm also very spiritual. I think like we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And if you look at astrologically what is happening in this world, like, it's funny, today is like a full moon. Like, we're having this conversation on full moon. Yes. And so that little witchy part of me knows that everything happens for us. It doesn't happen to us. Everything happens for us to learn and grow and evolve as spiritual beings having a human experience. And as long as we can keep people safe during that journey, it's going to be okay.
Oh, Fiona, I wish we were in person. I would give you a giant hug. That's a great message. Virtual hug. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's
gosh.
Gonna be okay.
Listen, this has been great. As we wrap up, I want to ask you, what does impact mean to you?
Oh gosh. So impact is an energy exchange. So you can have positive impact and you can have negative impact, and then you can have like some kind of gray area between, because nothing is a binary. A positive impact is when an action or an energy has come to you and you can put it back out into the world and have a positive outcome. And that can happen like, again, like a negative outcome or some kind of fluffy outcome that you're not really quite sure of. And so I think impact can have many different labels associated with it. It's not always good, bad, or indifferent, or somewhere in the middle. I think that if we as people live with the intention of pushing out as much positive impact as possible, then that would serve everybody quite well. But yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I think that we're very aligned philosophically as well in that sense. I do believe that life is always working out for us in some level. Like it is going to work out, and it's hard to see it sometimes. And yet, we show up, we do the work, we put out as much good as we can, and it's going to be okay.
Everything's going to be okay. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Fiona, you are fascinating. This has been a great conversation. You have films people can check out. You've got a book and one on the way, or are they both out now?
They're both out. So going back to what my dad said, I think bisexuals are just greedy. So in 2022, I published my first book, and the title is Are Bisexuals Just Greedy? And the subheader is animated.
No idea what impact.
Well, no, he didn't. And it's like, I have an amazing relationship with my dad as well. I mean, please, everybody know that. Like, he laughs about it. Like, he gets a kick out of the daughter that him and my mum somehow created. But it's animated answers for all people who want to understand the spectrum of gender and sexuality. So I would say that first one has very cheeky language and has, talks about things in a very direct way. So some workplaces might not want it in their workplace. And so I did the second version, which is, what does that LGBTQIA plus label mean? And that, again, is the same kind of explainer book. There's very little difference between the two. But the second one, what does that LGBTQIA label mean, is designed to be safe for work. So any workplace wants to hire me as a speaker and have me talk about it. And I edited it because NATO hired me to speak and they wanted me to bring the book. And I was like, oh gosh, I better edit the book. So the second one is safe for work. The first one is like, if you don't care what I'm talking about, read that one.
Well, I know which one I would pick personally. But that's
it's dedicated to my dad. So I'll
I love that. So how can people find you and get access to all this material and hire you to speak and all of that?
I'm a bit wriggly on the internet. I'm hard to follow because I avoid social media. But my website is Free Lion Productions, like Free Lion. freelionproductions.com. And so that's where you can see my films and videos and animation and all the stuff that we do. And then it does have links to my socials, and eventually I'll reply to social. And also, of course, LinkedIn. I'm better at checking my LinkedIn these days.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and talking about impact and just all the wonderful work you're doing in the world. You are fab, Fiona. I love this.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks for this opportunity.
And now, here's our impact tip of the month. There are a lot of ways to support LGBTQIA+ visibility, and one of those ways is by buying from queer businesses and artisans. Look for shops, galleries, or businesses that are owned or run by LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs and artists. Supporting these endeavors not only helps sustain their work, but contributes to broader LGBTQ+ visibility in the world. Thanks for listening, and make sure to do good in the world this month. If you have questions you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can reach us at info@riveocreative.com. Subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on any of our incredible upcoming guests. We'll see you soon at the Riveo Impact Lab.